welcome everyone at the Rumi Forum. The Rumi Forum was established in 1999 to further coexistence and peace in the world by furthering values of democracy and human rights. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Ambassador Cynthia Schneider. Ambassador Schneider is a practitioner of public diplomacy. She teaches public diplomacy at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. At the Saban Center for Middle East Policy, she leads the Arts and Culture Initiative at the Brookings Institution. Cynthia also co-founded and co-directs MOST, a Muslims on Screen and Television Resource Center, which provides valuable and accurate information on Islam and Muslims to the US entertainment business. Cynthia also happened to be a dear friend and mentor, so it is an extra pleasure to introduce her today. Ambassador Schneider will be speaking to us today about repairing mirrors, cultural diplomacy in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. If I may just add one thing, I know Cynthia and I have been traveling together in the region. She's constantly in the region with people on the ground to further her mission.
Thanks
Cynthia.
so much, Nadia. You've really helped me understand things in the Arab world as well, and we've co-published a couple of articles together on CNN, which I could never have done without your help, because you read all the Arabic and can interpret for me what people are really saying. So I always enjoy doing things with you. I'm going to begin with a couple of definitions. I was just having a conversation where I said I get very frustrated with definitions and think that you can spend your life doing it and it's kind of a waste of time. But I now feel compelled to begin with definitions, and then I'm going to go on and explain why I chose this title, Repairing the Broken Mirror, and give you some thoughts on cultural diplomacy in Southeast Asia and also in the Middle East. First, definitions. I actually consider what I try to do, teach, write about cultural diplomacy more than public diplomacy, and I am insisting on that difference for the following reason. Public diplomacy, as it has been defined in the United States, and really the rest of the world has followed this, is defined as something where the effort is to increase and promote understanding and acceptance of the policy, ideas, even values, which I think is a very loaded, dangerous enterprise, of country A towards the rest of the world. I am not so interested in that, actually. I think that if you create the policies, it should be your responsibility, the creators of the policies, to promote their acceptance. I don't actually believe in this, that you have policy A over here and then you have Department B over here that can, through some nice outreach efforts, get people to accept policy A. I think people judge countries and individuals by their actions more than by their outreach. I rather focus on cultural diplomacy, which I see as a more two-way enterprise, an exchange of people, ideas, culture, living and dead. But I am particularly interested in the intake part of cultural diplomacy, just as much as the output, which is to say that I think a greatly underused tool in understanding other countries is their culture. So if you have countries, as we do, which really pose many of the greatest challenges in the world today, where the government is disenfranchised from the people, say, for example, a country like Pakistan, which I say with great hesitation knowing that there's very serious Pakistan experts in the room. But nonetheless, take a country like Pakistan where all you hear is how terrible the relationship is. It's completely broken, no trust, and we persist and sort of bashing our heads against the wall, trying to wring blood out of a stone and build a relationship with a government which is completely disenfranchised from the people. Meanwhile, without much attention from our part, is an incredibly vibrant civil society, which is really doing the work that governments often do, building schools, building clinics, cleaning up cities. An incredibly vibrant cultural sector, which holds the memory of that country, the identity of that country, which people really relate to. But somehow that's not serious, and all we can do is focus on the government and the military. And I think, it's not so much a question of the old Cold War paradigm of how can we keep freedom alive by sending people American culture. That, I think, it's happening. It's happening in the commercial sector all over the place. It has nothing to do with the government. People are enjoying American culture because they want to pay to go to American movies, or pay to go to an American restaurant, pay to purchase American music. That's happening. But in the great challenge that I think faces us today, and I think the greatest challenge is really the fight against extremism per se, not a religion, not a country, extremist ideologies. That's a cultural battle. It's waged with military means, but it's a cultural battle. And what is missing, I think, is the cultural surge. But it's not an American cultural surge that's missing. It is an interior, local cultural surge, whether you're talking about Egypt, whether you're talking about Pakistan, whether you're talking about Afghanistan, and it's different in each place. So before you can even begin to understand this, you have to understand culture, history, creative expression in that place. So now I'm going to turn to the broken mirror. I'm going to quote Samiullah Namizadeh, an Afghan television writer who works for Mobi Media, the largest independent media company in Afghanistan, run by Saad Husseini and his family. Sami was this summer in California at the USC Film School for a summer training program, and this is what he wrote me after I met him there. Quote, "I believe that the literary, the theater, the cinema, the music, and all other arts are the bridges who are giving links to a nation to see its past or future or its presence. The arts are the mirrors in which a nation can see itself. In our case, the mirror is broken. In our case of Afghanistan. And it's changed into pieces. We have all the world with us who want to support us by providing food, providing security, but there is no one who wants to support us to find the pieces of our broken mirror, put them together, and see the nation's history through it." He goes on to say, "Help us to develop our culture, our cinema. Help us that through helping our cinema and our art, we could create the mirrors for our nation to show them themselves. Besides all other supports, the world brought us lots of weapons to keep peace among our people, which I don't think worked out very well. But this time, let's try to bring the air of the piece, the picture of the piece, the sound of the piece, the music of the piece through cinema, music, theater, painting, and all other arts and cultural programs." English is not his first language, and I challenge anyone for whom it is to write something more eloquent than that. And when you think about what Sami said, it's so basic. How can we or anyone expect Afghanistan to have the energy, the wherewithal, the will to rebuild itself when actually people like him, who are the majority of the population, as is true in most of the Muslim majority regions, people like him in their 20s don't even know really what their country is and what their country has been. What they know is conflict and war. I'll give you another example. I was there in Afghanistan actually this time last year. I feel very fortunate to have gone then because it's deteriorated so much. It's so much more dangerous now than it was a year ago. But I was there and I visited all of the extraordinary cultural institutions that are in Kabul. And I was accompanied by a 25-year-old translator who also works for Moby Media, fluent in English and college educated. And our last stop was the Museum of Kabul, which is miraculously standing and open to visitors. It's been bombed multiple times and it's rebuilt. Its galleries are open. I found it somewhat depressing because I know that it only has about 10% of its collection is there, and the great treasures, the Afghan treasures, beautiful gold, is still traveling because they don't have the security to show it in Kabul yet. At the end of our visit, I asked Keeb, I said, what did you like best of all the things we saw together? And he said, oh, the museum, by far the museum. And he got sort of angry at me that we hadn't spent enough time there. I felt we'd spent the longest possible time, but he said we hadn't spent enough time. He read every single label. He said two things. I never knew Afghanistan had such an important history. And number two, I never knew that Afghanistan had a Buddhist past. Because of course there are all those statues of Buddha.
Wow.
Now, if I said, but wait a minute, don't you remember the destruction of the Buddhas in Bamiyan? He probably would say, yeah, I remember that. But somehow the connection of what that means for him and his history, no one had made that. And, you know, that's another point. The enemies of freedom, tolerance, a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, they always know to target the cultural symbols. They know the power of culture. Ironically, the people who maybe take it for granted don't recognize that power. Now, having said that, I have to commend, in the strongest possible way, the U.S. presence in Afghanistan, the U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan, particularly under the leadership of Carl Eikenberry and David Ensor, who's now running the Voice of America, running public affairs, because they did recognize the importance of culture and history and actually have on staff at the embassy a full-time trained archaeologist. Laura Tedesco, a real Indiana Jones figure who goes out to the most dangerous parts of the country and has forged very strong and good relationships with the museum director, with the people running the very important excavation sites, and the embassy, the U.S. government through the embassy has worked a partnership out with the museum and with the Ministry of Culture to build a new wing onto the museum so that they can exhibit the great treasures that are now traveling, and also is working with them to help increase museum education and outreach so that you will have people coming there and you will have this integrated into the school curriculum. So that was recognized, and I really commend that. But you know, it's again recognizing what is needed in their own terms, in their own place, and working with that. The other example of Afghanistan I'd like to point to is the National Institute of Music there, which is run by an Afghan expat who's returned. An extraordinary institution, an educational institution from ages 10 to 20. They teach music, but also a full curriculum. Half of the students come from the streets of Afghanistan, literally street children. They are brought in, they are paid $1 a day, which is more than they earn on the street, so their families allow them to go to school, always a challenge with the girls. and the director fights for every girl to stay in that school. They perform at such an extraordinarily excellent standard. They are the most sought-after performers in Kabul. When I was last there, in 1 week, they were performing at the American Embassy before the Parliament, before the President. And at the same time, they're reviving Afghan music. Many of the practitioners of this music have died. They're reviving it. They have a collection of the instruments. So it's, you know, bringing back this culture which was taken away during the time of the Taliban and bringing it back to them. And at a very excellent standard. The American ambassador, Carl Eikenberry, when he was there, after he visited the school, he left the school and the press was waiting to see what he thought about it. He said, "I'll tell you what I saw today. Today, I saw the future of Afghanistan. Let's hope." A very important aspect of that school, which comes across also in the media in Afghanistan, one program in particular, Afghan Star, which is an Afghan version of American Idol. And I love to say to people that I think this has an incredibly positive impact, and people go, "Ew, American Idol, how could that be good?" Well, you know, what is American Idol? It's a meritocracy. It's a place where you try out, everybody tries out under the same terms, you risk it, you go out there on your own, and it's nothing but you and your talent, or unfortunately sometimes lack thereof. It doesn't matter who your parent is or how much money you have, it's just you. That concept of a meritocracy is a very rare thing in a tribal society like Afghanistan or any number of other countries. So that's what Afghan Star is. They go all over the country. And people try out. It's sometimes painful. I've seen it. But out of that eventually emerge, you know, a core set who compete on television, and then people vote in by their cell phone, so it's chosen by the people. It's a platform for women. It's a platform for people of different ethnic groups, and they're all singing Afghan songs, so it's also reviving their own traditions. It's American inspired, but it's very Afghan. The American government role in this is that the American government has given significant support to independent media in Afghanistan, to lots of different stations. There's like 25 stations. And if you ask anybody in Afghanistan, they'll say it's the success story, the independent media. And ironically, this fledgling independent media, it's only 10 years old, is, I would argue, with the risk of being contradicted by some people in the room, more free and more able to hold the government accountable, which they do, than is true in next door Pakistan, which has a much more developed media and much more sophisticated media, but also more controlled media. This is true particularly in the cultural area. We have here in Washington a local Pakistani treasure, I would say, in Sardar Ali, who is an acclaimed and renowned classical musician from Pakistan. He is here in a windowless office in VOA, broadcasting to the Pashtun regions.
Wow.
Because he can't do that in Pakistan. They will not allow him to do cultural programming in the Pashtun regions. So he does that from here. And he broadcasts twice a week and brings this. He has a program on poetry and a program on Sufism. So he talks about very erudite conversations about different kinds of poetry. But again, this is these are things that we would never know about, but they're a very important part of the culture. Forms of poetry, the taka, that are just done by Tapa, I think, excuse me, that 90% of them are written by women. You know, so you're bringing poetry by women to women. Charbeta, you know, local forms of poetry and music that otherwise these people don't have access to, and it's, you know, part of their culture. And of course the Pashtun regions are the most challenging regions in terms of extremism. So from Washington, from the Voice of America, this very brilliant and talented Pakistani musician brings the culture back to his people. Another example from Pakistan. in their own history is the story of Darashikoh. This is the Shah Jahan who built the Taj Mahal. Had two sons, Aurangzeb and Darashikoh. Darashikoh was a kind of open, pacifistic, poetic, spiritual kind of person. Aurangzeb was much more strict and doctrinaire. Aurangzeb gained power and put his brother on trial and eventually had him killed and also imprisoned and had his father killed. The story of Darashikoh, the other brother, is basically lost in Pakistan history now. The pictures of Aurangzeb are in many government buildings. A very courageous theater producer and director, Shahid Nadeem, who has been doing socially conscious theater for 25 years in Pakistan with a company called Ajoka, has written a play and performed a play of Darashikoh. It was discussed in the Pakistani parliament, and they said, well, you can do it, but just don't make Aurangzeb look badly. Now, you know, he killed his brother and father, but spin that well. But, you know, but there's the picture of Aurangzeb in all the government buildings, and the story of Darashikoh is essentially lost to many people. So you perform this play, and that starts to make people question, you know, wait a minute, who are we? What kind of people are we? Are we this kind of people, or are we that kind of people? He also does a play called Bula about the Sufi saint Bula from the 19th century, and Bulleh Shah. And again, the kind of Sufism, which is so important, it varies from different regions, but the general Sufist philosophy and expression is very, very important in Pakistan. It's the opposite of the extremism that has unfortunately gained so much there lately. When he performs this play of Bulleh Shah, it again brings the Sufist approach, which is all-inclusive, tolerant of differences, back. He performed it recently in Peshawar, and the mayor of the town came up at the end of it with tears in his eyes, and because he said, this is the first performance that we have had here in 10 years. He then asked Shahid if he would do a play about their Sufi saint, Ramon Baba, who's the Sufi saint from that region, which Shahid is going to do. And the shrine for Ramon Baba in that Peshawar region, which again the most extremist region, had been desecrated by the Taliban. So this is where this conflict takes place. And you know, whether or not the Pakistanis like America, it just seems to me so irrelevant. You know, that is not the point. The point is, you know, how are they leading their lives, and how are they waging this battle, and in what way, on their terms, can we be helpful? And I should say, Shahid Nadeem has recently received a fellowship from the National Endowment for Democracy, and he's going to be here in Washington for 6 months, and I hope to get him out to speak as much as possible, doing research on Sufism and the potential of Sufism to be a positive force. As he said to me, they can't stop me from saying things that are actually happened in history. So sometimes you need to revive the past to hold the present accountable. And that's what he's doing. I'll just briefly mention, and Nadia, you can ask me then the questions if you want to. A couple of other areas now focusing on the Middle East where there are connections with things American, not because we've put them there, but because of a power of attraction. And this to me is the real soft power, when people are attracted to things from America and interpret them in their own way and make them their own. Two important examples of that are huge all over the Arab world are hip-hop music, which is really the music of the revolution now. Before that, it was the music of dissent and protest. And the interesting thing is, again, I love to say that, and people go, ooh, hip-hop music, you know, bling, diamonds in your teeth, misogynistic lyrics. No, but that's not what people are attracted to. They're attracted in the Arab world and many parts of the world to political hip-hop, the origins of hip-hop in the Bronx in the 80s and early 90s, when it was, again, the dissent against authority. The American authority in that case, but that is what people gravitate to and have developed their own. There's hip-hop in Arabic. It's huge in Palestine, not surprisingly, where people lead very challenged lives. The top hip-hop group, DAM, says that hip-hop is our CNN. I mean, talk about American references, and what do we do with Palestine? Don't get me started. And the other example is stand-up comedy, which is now huge all over the Arab world. And it's not as if nobody in the Arab world had a sense of humor before stand-up comedy. Of course they did. But stand-up, the idea of an individual standing before a crowd and amusing them by sometimes self-references or references about them, making familiar things funny, has now taken off all over the Arab world, and I would add in this country. And it's very important in this country with these tours we just had here in Washington last week, Arabs Gone Wild, led by Dean Obadallah, who's led the Arab Film Festival in Jordan and has the Arab American Film Festival in New York. And the jokes are always making fun of things that are recognizable. They're very funny jokes about, the Muslim on the air, recognizable Muslim on the airplane, which everybody looks at with great anxiety, and sort of high fives and when the plane lands and pretends like they're their best friends. I mean, these are things that we all recognize. The other very important role for comedy, and you have seen this in the revolutions, it's a way to criticize the government. And that's, of course, the Jon Stewart model, which has been picked up all over the world as well, to great effect even in Iran. But I'll end there, and I can happy take questions on these or any other subjects, and I'll turn to you,
So
Nadia.
if I may use my prerogative as a moderator and start with actually two questions. I had one, but I couldn't help but wonder, given the proven power of culture, because it is authentic, organic, from within each of these countries, and given its ability to actually further humanistic values and democracy and human rights and all the values we actually want to root in these countries, why is not there done? Why isn't more American companies, why isn't the US focusing more on furthering culture than giving weapons, or given that it's actually a shortcut? This is my first question. And my second question is regarding film, actually. I know film is also another realm that is almost exploding and is beautiful. I did a study, as you know, on Arab culture and saw the beautiful Jordanian American production of Captain Abu Ra'id, and how that can bring people together and can provide such beautiful message. Can you talk more about film?
Okay, so for your first question, why doesn't, I have to emphasize the difference between the U.S. government and U.S. Commercial sector, which is often actually not understood in other parts of the world, because we have a unique model here with such an important commercial culture that doesn't really exist anywhere else, possible except from India. India also has an important cultural sector, but almost everywhere else in the world, the government is really a part of culture and funds it significantly. So when our cultural products, such as, for example, the most widely distributed television show ever, Baywatch, are seen in parts of the world, in many cases the audiences are associating that with the U.S. government. And of course, has nothing to do with the U.S. government. In fact, it really has very little to do with the entertainment industry. That is because some distributor in some office in some remote suburb of Los Angeles, you know, it's not even Hollywood, makes money off distributing that product. And why? Because people watch it. So, you know, that isn't anything about sending it out. That's because people like it. They do it for commerce. If they weren't making money, they wouldn't be distributing it. So you have to separate what the U.S. What U.S. companies do from what the U.S. governments do. And I'll just give you one example of a U.S. company which I think is brilliant in this, and that is CocaCola. Again, to go back to Pakistan, this country where supposedly everybody hates us, if you ask anyone in Pakistan what is their favorite kind of music, they will say, chances are, Coke studio music. And they are talking about Coke as in Coca-Cola. And this started several years ago. Coca-Cola, in an effort, of course, to increase its brand recognition and increase its sales in Pakistan, very intelligently recognized the importance of music to people in Pakistan and wanted to find a way to connect. They have said to me there, the two great ways to connect in this country are through sports and through music. They wanted to find a way to do that with a kind of new marketing initiative. They hired a very talented musical producer and came up with their very smart young PR executives with the idea of Coke Studio, which is a television program and a very active website. I encourage you to go to it, where they record sessions that bring together traditional Pakistani musicians and top contemporary pop musicians to make new music. The television show is always just the recording and a little bit of interviews, and out of it comes this incredible music that both people say Coke has kept music alive in Pakistan because it's too dangerous to have concerts. You used to have the largest performing arts festival in the world in Lahore. Thousands and thousands of people over a 2-week period. Now you can't have an outdoor concert, it's just too dangerous. But in that time, meanwhile, there's a new type of music, traditional music's being reintroduced to Pakistani audiences, and everybody listens to it, from the people driving the multicolored lorries to the university professors. And that's a case of identifying something that is needed and desired on their own terms. And you have a big Coca-Cola image in the recording studio. There's no question who's bringing this, but people like it so much it doesn't matter. So that's an example of commercial. Why don't we diplomatically do more with this? I wish I could answer this. If any of you can answer it, I would love to hear it. There has always been a kind of separation in U.S. diplomacy and international relations between things that have to do with kind of hard diplomacy, what I like to describe as men in suits around a table signing treaties, which we all recognize is not the way diplomacy, that's one way it's done, but now in this age of 24/7 news cycle and YouTube and everything, it's a different world, but I don't think we've really adjusted to that world yet. The State Department has many Facebook pages. That's good. I wonder how much time people spend reading other people's Facebook pages. That's the other side of it. And integrating that knowledge. If more time had been spent doing that, then they might have noticed the We Are All Khalid Said Facebook page about the young man murdered by the security police in Alexandria a year and a half ago. That was the page that was set up by now famous Wael Ghanim, that was the gathering point that led eventually to the Egyptian revolution. So it's not enough to output, you've got to input too. And during the Cold War, the power of culture, our culture, was recognized, and it was valued all over the world. This was doing it on people's terms. You know, Václav Havel said that jazz music sent in through the Voice of America kept hopes of freedom alive in Czechoslovakia. There was a very real hunger for an appreciation of American culture. We also recognized the value of local culture, if you will. It was American money and efforts that funded the distribution and publication of Solzhenitsyn's works in the Soviet Union then, got them out and also distributed them within, you know, as well as sending American authors. An interesting caveat to those very impressive efforts during the Cold War, when also we sent jazz musicians, African-American jazz musicians, around the world for like month-long tours at a time when segregation was still major in the United States. And these emissaries of America felt very free to criticize America, and they did. When, you know, people said, "What's your life like?" when they were being feted in these concert halls and couldn't even go in the front door of many places in the United States, they spoke freely about it. And the State Department that was sending them knew that they spoke freely about it, and they were going to criticize the American government if they were asked. And what we recognized then was the power of dissent as an ambassador. You know, you can't just talk about freedom and human rights. That doesn't mean anything. But if you are actually exercising the right of freedom of speech, and, you know, are actually criticizing the government in a totalitarian society, and then instead of being punished or imprisoned, you are put on the plane and sent somewhere else to say the same thing again, that makes a very powerful impression. We understood that during the Cold War period. The caveat is that, of course, where did all this money come from to send jazz musicians and to have exhibitions and to translate books and everything? We now know that a certain amount of it, and we don't really know how much, and the lines are very blurry, and we'll probably never know, a certain amount of it came from the CIA. And I always feel this is good and bad news. Obviously, the bad news is it's not good to try to do an outreach effort to increase trust and understanding through covert means. That there's a slight contradiction. On the other hand, the fact that the CIA was brought in to fund these cultural efforts, and not all of them, and again, we don't know exactly which ones and how much, we know some, but not everything, does mean that someone thought this was important. And someone recognized the importance of culture as a tool, and I think most people now would recognize that it was, in fact, that those cultural links that were very important in bringing down eventually the Iron Curtain and breaking up the Soviet Union. But sadly, we made the terrible mistake once that happened in 1989 of thinking, okay, well, that problem's solved, so we don't need this culture stuff anymore. And so in 1999, the separate arm of the State Department that was responsible for culture, the U.S. Information Agency, was folded into the State Department, which, you know, could have been good, but ultimately wasn't, because its budget was demolished at the same time. And we thought, well, we don't need to worry about this anymore, you know, just at the moment that it was most important. And so now you have the kind of regional bureaus and the people who deal with policy over here, and literally over here people who do cultural exchange, which is, you know, important to keep going, but they're not integrated. You don't have culture being considered something that you need to do to understand countries and really relate to them in a positive way.
And film?
Oh, film, sorry.
We open it to the
no, film. Well,
audience.
film is, of course, all about telling stories. And I love it when you always have American movie stars who go to the Arab world and other places and they say, oh, you need to tell your own stories. Well, yeah, but how? And, you know, how in a way that is actually going to be communicated beyond their own audiences. And I think two places, India, and it has its own idiom of film, and the United States are recognized as places that really know how to make movies that people want to watch. And it isn't to say it's the only way or the best way, but you know, people in this country know how to tell a story in a tight, exciting way that draws audiences. And that's ultimately what you want to do. And I'm happy to say this is a skill that we are sharing, I think, in really positive ways. There is, in Jordan, the first dedicated film school in the Middle East, and this is a partnership with USC, one of our greatest film schools here. USC is called the Red Sea Institute of Cinematic Arts, and it draws a fantastic student body from all over the Muslim-majority world. Lots of Iranians, for example, go there, people from Afghanistan, people from all over. English is the common language. It's a top-flight, you know, film education, and their graduates are now producing films that are being seen all over the world. Also, the Sundance Institute has been fantastic in this and has run screenwriting workshops now for years in Jordan, and now they're starting in Turkey as well. And they take very promising writers and bring mentors from all over the world, not just Americans, but from all over the world. And in Jordan, they go out into the desert, literally, for like 10 days and sit with these scripts and work and work and work on them. And, you know, it is the original story, but they help the writers, and this happened with Abu Raid, streamline the story, tighten it a little bit so that it becomes a film that then can be seen around the world. Because Arabic, you know, every country has its own kind of idiom for filmmaking, and that's good for that country, but quite honestly, it often doesn't travel. And so that's how you get stories like Captain Abu Raid, the Paradise Now, Amrika. These are all films that have been seen in this country. I mean, independent films, of course, but they have a sizable audience, and around the world. And I think it's such a great effort, and quite honestly, I wish they had more funding so they could expand, because it's a fantastic model and has been really successful.
I will open the floor for questions. Go ahead.
It pertains to several points you raised, but most importantly is the question of trust. When we're talking of cultural diplomacy and these ideas, essentially, I think there is a trust deficit, especially when you're speaking to a Middle Eastern audience. I'm from India originally, but I've worked in the Middle East. I was in Dubai, working in the PR industry for about 2 years. And one thing which strikes me was how much certain media, which was seen as sort of pro-American, were not seen with as much trust as probably, say, Al Jazeera. I'm just using an example. So how do you break that trust deficit? How do you capitalize on building more trust? Because I think that's the bottom line, or the foundation on which you really build higher values. So without that, I think we are really not building on a strong foundation. I know it's a meta question, but still I think it needs to be.
Just help me understand when you say certain media, what are you talking about?
Okay, let's use Al Arabiya, for example. I think it was a station founded largely under the Bush administration.
You mean Al Hurra?
Al Hurra, I'm sorry, yeah, Al Hurra. And I mean, certain clients that I worked with, they actually positively discriminate against Al Hurra, and they were like, let's stay away from them for now and give this opportunity to somebody else. I mean, this is something which I faced on a daily basis. And I did not understand this at the beginning, but after some time, I kind of got there's something else beyond just the media itself, or the outlet. It wasn't the outlet, but broader philosophy of what this stood for.
Okay. So, you're absolutely right that the building of trust is extremely important, and that I'll talk a little bit about Al Hurra and explain that, but I want to go back to the initial definitions because I think beginning with this integration into the State Department of the formerly separate U.S. information agency that led to the first public diplomacy bureau within the State Department. Beginning with that, which happened in 1999, there has been this idea that you have this public diplomacy section which can do outreach and promote acceptance and basically build relationships with people around the world. And it was you never exactly articulated. Actually, incredibly enough, it was kind of articulated, because the first person who was in that position was a very talented marketing executive named Charlotte Beers, and about her, Secretary Colin Powell actually said if she could sell Uncle Ben's rice, I'm sure she can also sell America, which nobody here would think that. Who could think that? It's a crazy idea. And of course, it didn't work. It didn't translate, and she didn't stay very, very long. But it was a completely unreasonable expectation on the part of anyone in the State Department to think that you can have a group of people who are going to promote acceptance of policies that are perhaps inherently problematic for the people towards whom they're directed. No amount of PR is going to make up for that. So that was a misguided notion from the start. Any country is always going to, and ask the millions of people making millions of dollars off lobbying here. They can lobby away, but ultimately, any country is only going to be judged on its actions. And we've seen that again and again. It doesn't matter how talented the public diplomacy person is, they're never going to be able to make up for policies. Another model is the model used by many other countries, mostly European countries, where they have like the British Council, the Maison Française, the Goethe Institute, which are at arm's length from their diplomatic bureaus, and who have the exclusive goal of building relationships between people. And they are not supposed to promote understanding of policies or something. And I think you'll find that they work very effectively in a different way. It's a model, unfortunately, we used to have, but we don't have anymore. Al-Hurra is a U.S. government-funded and founded media outlet, a television station. Its companion was Sawa for radio, that was founded in the wake of September 11th to promote acceptance and understanding and present the American viewpoint within the Arab world. In my view, it was a complete and total waste of money. And I shudder to think of the amount of money it was, like something like $500 million, which is horrifying. We have many talented people in media in this country. And so the idea that the government should put together a media station is, in my view, not a sensible one and a waste of money. And it's not surprising that not that many people listen to it, and all they have to do is vote with their feet or their index finger on the TiVo and just not watch it. Another alternative, I'm not saying the whole idea was crazy, another alternative might have been, because I think you actually do need some targeted media to counter the purely commercial media. Right now, what people see is purely commercially driven. And I think there is a role for government to play then. There absolutely is. And I'll give you an analogy. When I was ambassador in the Netherlands, our leading export was aerospace products. And I spent a great deal of my time working on the sale of the Joint Strike Fighter to the Dutch military. And I'm happy to say we succeeded. And I think that was time well spent. That was a very important strategic partnership and move. And it was entirely appropriate. The U.S. government didn't make the Joint Strike Fighter, but it was important to the U.S. government that the Dutch be our partners in its construction. And that was entirely appropriate. Now, creative products are always among our top three. I'm not suggesting the government make those products, but there is probably a role for some kind of subsidizing of distribution. And so if we aren't happy with Baywatch being seen everywhere, you can't stop that, but you can subsidize distribution of other already commercially made products. Another alternative to the creation of Al-Hurra would have been to commission and subsidize the production of, say, independent film products that could have then been shopped around, marketed to the hundreds, and there are hundreds of different stations already existing in the Arab world. And if they're good, they would have been picked up. If not, they wouldn't have been. But that would have been another way, and I think a better way to spend that money.
We have about 10 minutes left, so I'll take 3 questions from the audience.
My name is Jean Marcella. I'm a research associate with the Public International Law and Policy Group. And I was wondering, say you have parties engaging in negotiations for a ceasefire or a peace agreement in the Middle East, and how can you ensure that the parties are sort of trying to appeal to the opposing party's culture instead of sort of falling back and trying to aim their message specifically to the government?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but I will try. Again, culture is, of course, one of those difficult terms that is all-embracing, whether it means creative expression or literally the way people lead their lives. And a negotiation is only going to be successful if there is some degree of understanding and give and take on both sides. So I think we could use the current state of the lack of discussion between Palestine and Israel right now as an example of what you're saying. I would say that each party is playing to its own public without making a great deal of effort to reach common ground with its counterpart. And there is no intermediate party. In the past it has been the United States, but currently there is no intermediate party who is viewed as an equal broker who can facilitate that kind of exchange. So I think you're never going to have a successful negotiation that doesn't involve some kind of give and take on both sides. But obviously there are a lot of other things that are important besides culture in that. But it's a part of the understanding that you have to have any success in negotiation.
We'll take one last question, sir.
We've been in Afghanistan for 10 years now. Mm-hmm. We're tired.
Yeah, I know.
Will a different approach get us out quicker? I mean, we're stuck. And that's why they say Afghanistan is not kind to strangers, and we certainly are learning that in many areas, not only there. Do you have a different approach of how we can end this, which is bleeding this country, and we see the impact in this country in many ways. We're not only tired of Afghanistan, but of course Iraq, and of course of Israel and Palestine. We're tired of all of that stuff. But would you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's such a hard thing. See, I have lots of ideas about how we it should have begun in Afghanistan. I have many more ideas about that than about how we can end in Afghanistan. And actually, one of the real tragedies is that the country was really in quite good shape in 2005, 2006, and things have deteriorated since that time. A couple of thoughts. Number one, what I'm saying, it would have been such a good thing if a deeper understanding of the culture had been part of our initial entry into Afghanistan, and obviously goes without saying in Iraq. The stories of the things that went wrong in Iraq just makes your hair stand on end. And the idea, the arrogance, which I think, I hope wouldn't happen again, that you could, go into a country without knowing anything about it, which had, a lot to do with internal politics as much as anything else. Literally the people who took over in Iraq in the very beginning, before Jerry Bremer got there. I'm blanking on his name. General, I'm blanking on his name. But anyway, yeah. He was literally ordered by Secretary Rumsfeld not to read the report that had been prepared by the State Department about Iraq. Someone offered to show it to him. He said, well, you can just read it here and then throw it out. No one will ever know. And he said, I cannot read it. I have been ordered not to read it, so I can't disobey orders. So, I mean, that kind of approach is just, not surprising that things ended up the way they did. So, at the very beginning, you can't get anywhere without some kind of cultural understanding and connection. That being said, that is absolutely the way the U.S. military is working now, and has been working for the last few years. If you talk to anyone in the U.S. military about what they're doing in Afghanistan, they will talk about, they are talking to the tribal elders, they are drinking lots of tea, they are working with local communities, they are building schools. That is exactly what they're doing. So we have learned this. Sadly, I hope it's not totally too late. We also kind of developed our own partner there in Hamid Karzai. That is problematic. There's so many parts to this puzzle. So sadly, I think we kind of get it now, but how that can translate into a viable country is unclear to me, and I understand the urge to leave, and I understand our own dire economic situation. I can't say that Afghanistan is more important, but I am also haunted by recent history. Anyone who has seen Charlie Wilson's War, remember that haunting scene in the end when he's gotten all of these tens of millions of dollars to fight the war with the Mujahideen, and then he can't get $1 million to build schools. And here we are again. So it is the chronic challenge of our government and the way in which we work, which I don't have any way out of, that to have a long-term vision is so difficult. Because you are responsible, and that's the strength of our government, that it is responsible to the people. And you're responsible in the short and immediate term. But I think, I'm hoping that we can, as we pull out militarily, I'm hoping that the people who stay there, and I've spoken with the military there, and I'm so impressed with what they're doing and their very deep understanding of that country and its needs. I'm hoping that the more civilian-oriented people who stay behind will be able to work in civil society and have a positive impact.
Well, with this we conclude our talk today. I'd like to thank our distinguished speaker, Ambassador Schneider, and I'd like to thank you all for coming to this talk at the Rumi Forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Nadia.